Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this presentation on the art and career of Lee Krasner. She's showed there in one of her bohemian moments in 1938. I'm excited to present this. I think you'll all find that this is an amazing artist that should be even better known than she is. This is part of a continuing series of Jewish artists that had a significant impact on American modernism, thanks to the sponsorship of Kehilat Hanahar, Little Shul by the River. And as I say, one of a series, I think this is the 10th. And they're all available. They've all been recorded, I believe, and they can be obtained through the Kehilat website. In 1984, MoMA did a retrospective of Lee Krasner. It had traveled from Houston, Fine Arts. It was on its way to Pompidou, but it was in New York in December. And this was to be the greatest moment in Krasner's life. She always felt that she wasn't getting the attention and acclaim that the other first generation abstract expressionists got, all of whom were male, including her husband for 14 years, Jackson Pollock. This retrospective finally recognized her as a leading first generation abstract expressionist, and it chronicled her strength, her individuality, her innovation. And she had a legacy of constant innovation and exploration. Of all the abstract expressionists, Art Week said at this show, only Krasner had contact with virtually every major force that staged its evolution. This is what she always wanted, finally. Unfortunately, she never got to see it, as she died in June of that year, several months before the opening, at age 75. Let's take a look at her extraordinary career over 6 decades. Next. Okay, this is a portrait of Krasner that she did, a self-portrait. She was 20 years old, and she submitted this for admission to the National Academy of Design. And we'll come back to this, her early years, her childhood, she was one of 7 children, immigrants from Bessarabia, today is Moldova. She wanted to be an artist from a young age. At 13, she applied to the only high school available to women to do art, to study art. And that was Washington Irving High School. She applied, she got rejected. She applied again a few months later, and they let her in. And one of the quotes from her time in that we had a record of is, quote, "This student is a bother, insisting on having her own way despite school rules." So Krasner right away was asserting herself. After Washington Irving High School, she went on to Cooper Union, where she got a scholarship. She moved from there to the National Academy. While she was taking classes at the Art Student League, she then went to the Greenwich School briefly, CCNY, when she thought she might need a teaching certificate for art. And then finally found her way, as we'll discuss, to Hans Hofmann's legendary studio. All told, she had 18 years of training, of painting, of drawing before she finished with Hans Hofmann. She was as well-versed in every aspect of art, European and otherwise, as any artist practicing at the time. Next. Actually, Jerry, go back for a sec. This portrait she did for admission to the National Academy. She painted outside by hanging a mirror on a tree and painting herself in full artist regalia, holding her brushes with a serious artist look on her face. The National Academy didn't think she painted this outside. She thought it was too fine a painting and must have been painted indoors. And they admitted her, but they put her on probation until they could confirm that she had painted this outside, and she became a student. Next. These are portraits. The one on the left, a self-portrait she did in her basement in Brooklyn. The one on the right is a portrait by Igor Pantuhov, who was a fellow student and a boyfriend right up until the time she meets Jackson Pollock. But she did self-portraits, and these early ones made it clear from the beginning, as she said, that my subject matter is myself. And she said that her art, all through her career, was autobiographical. And all the changes that she made, and she called them breaks, and we'll see 7 or 8 of these important specific breaks, are all she felt autobiographical. Next. These are nude studies that she did in 1933 at the Greenwich House. Her teacher was John Goodman, and she was very focused on the old masters, and she did many nude studies. These are only 3, but already you can see the artistry and the command she has in doing the human figure. Next. This is a painting that she did in 1934 from 213 West 14th Street, which provided access to the roof from where she painted many of these. This is just one, very Hopper-esque, and a number of them were the same, but again, showing sort of a different approach that she was emulating, because she was looking at this art. She was in MoMA when it opened in 1929. She was at Stieglitz Gallery. She was looking at both the American and increasingly at the European artists. So this is just one of a number of studies she did. Next. This too reflects the influence that she was experiencing and taking in of both the surrealists as well as generally the work of Miro, which we can see here, and Cezanne and Picasso and Di Chirico, who became a favorite of hers. Remember that in 1929, the crash was also the opening of MoMA. Its first show was Cezanne, Gauguin, Seurat, Van Gogh, and for her, it was like a bomb going off. And so we're seeing these influences that she is taking in as she pursues her own voice. Next. So she's very pragmatic. She's been painting now, by the time she gets to Hoffman's class, for 8 years. And she realizes that rather than struggle with the lines and planes and color as they are appearing in the work of the Europeans that she's admiring, that are knocking her out, she chooses to get as close to the source as possible, and that's Hans Hofmann, who is the teacher extraordinaire for most of the abstract expressionists. He had a studio in New York, also in Provincetown. This is Krasner on the left at his studio. And she says that the first 6 months, she didn't understand a word that he said. He spoke in a heavy German accent. He had 3 sessions a day. Life drawing in the morning and the evening, and still life in the afternoon. He would walk around twice a week, critiquing the work that was on everybody's easels. Fridays, he gave a lecture that was floor to ceiling, attended by every artist and writer about art, including Clement Greenberg and Harold Rothenberg, who were the 2 principal critics, both of whom, by the way, introduced to Hofmann by Lee Krasner. And so she is now a serious student of his. Next. So Hofmann her first class, she has a painting she's done on her easel, a drawing, and all the first were all charcoal drawings. He lifts her drawing off of the easel, rips it in half, and puts the bottom half on top of the first half and puts it back on the easel without a word and walks away. And she is furious. And this was the way she started with Hans Hofmann. Whatever was the point, it may have just been, are you ready to change your mind, change the way you see things, change the way you think? And that's the way she started. He was later to say that she was the most powerful student he ever had. And years later, when somebody said that Jackson Pollock was listed as one of his students, he corrected them and said, no, Jackson Pollock was a student of my student, the Lee Krasner. And so here we see these nude studies, charcoals, the first showing increasing geometric, non-objective command and experiments with space and line. The one on the right, which is very famous in MoMA and one of their classic Krasner pieces of work, demonstrates her very energetic, expressive application of line. And it's really a mark, this gestural expression in an increasingly assured hand in 1940, and she is now 32 years old. Next. These are the still lives that she did while she was there, and they are evidence, and he would arrange it. So when they would come into class, he would arrange an assortment of objects for them to paint as a still life. But these are both a good demonstration of what was his famous push-pull theory, that the objects by their color, and he matched cool and warm colors, these objects would dissolve into the surrounding space, exerting, creating this abstract composition, and they would be animated by, quote, the vibration of colored shapes pushing and pulling against one another. But again, masterful. She's, by this point, also very familiar with Matisse and Mondrian, who she becomes very close to. So that's also evident in these paintings. Next. So in 1935, she joins the Works Progress Administration and the Federal Arts Project under that. And for many of the artists, if not all, they wanted to work within this framework because it's the only way they were getting paid. So in 1935, her first job is illustrating fossils. And next she works as an assistant to another artist, Max Spivak, doing murals. In 1939, and this is the year that Picasso's Guernica is in town, the World's Fair is going on, MoMA's in a new building, and Krasner is broke. And she sells her phonograph and a radio, moves to a smaller apartment, and by way of decoration in that apartment to reflect her misery, she writes in big letters and quotes an Arthur Rimbaud poem called A Season in Hell. To whom shall I hire myself out? What beast must I adore? What holy image is attacked? What heart shall I break? What lie must I maintain? In what blood should I tread? Obviously, she's not happy and really struggling. So let's listen to her as interviewed by Larry Rivers, another New York City school artist, about the WPA and the Artists Union and other subjects.
There comes down to people my age, a certain kind of, not romance, but like idealization of the times. And I wonder if you could sort of straighten out the picture for us, folks out there in movie land, TV land. Did you yourself, for instance, go to meetings where there are artists? Did you join a union? Were there clubs to talk over problems, things like that?
Well, there was no clubs then. But like de Kooning had his studio, and he always had an entourage now. Like I used to go up to de Kooning. I don't know who else was landing. John Graham, I used to go and see. You wanted to see Gorky, you either went to his studio or the Jumble Shop, where Gorky would be sitting almost every night, and you could only get around the table if you liked Picasso. Now, of course, when the WPA started, you got something called the Artists Union. That became a big organization with the purpose of protecting the rights of the artists. Yes. And I was actively a part of that.
By actively, what do you mean?
I attended their meetings. I became part of their executive board. I chaired meetings.
So in other words, you were able to express certain political feelings that you had, certain notions you had about what's fair, what's unfair, what people should, what they deserve.
Right. Was arrested many, many times. I can remember one time, Orbax was on strike. That had nothing to do with us, but they were then on 14th Street. And the artists, for some reason I can't remember now, decided to support them. And like I remember Stuart Davis had a sign, you know, I am Stuart Davis, and I protest the firing or whatever they were doing. And we all carried our own sign. But for instance, at the same time, I was picketing the Museum of Modern Art. I was a member of the American Abstract Artists. Our signs then read, Show American Painting. We didn't want to stop showing French painting, you know. So on the one hand, one was.
But you felt as if they were a little.
It was like a way of like speaking.
Okay.
You know?
So then, this time, did you meet Jackson? Was he on the program too?
Okay, next. Next, Jerry. So we'll get to Jackson Pollock soon. On the left is a painting, red, white, blue, yellow, and black, and very Mondrian and Matisse-like. Mondrian was just arriving in New York. He had fled Europe with the Nazis coming in, took to New York like Gauguin took to Tahiti. He loved it. And he was a huge influence on Krasner. And in fact, she got to know him very well. They used to go dancing at the Cafe Society. They were both avid dancers, and night after night, they would go. He was like 25 years her senior, but they were a pair. Hoffman lectured about him, and he said that the Dutchman had reduced painting to its ultimate purity with his lines and rectangles, white space, and judicious use of color. And Krasner's work became more and more Mondrian-like, simpler, cleaner, more geometric. And the piece next to this in 1940, which he actually did for the WPA, this is Blue Square, but still Picasso-like, Cubist-like, but also starting to occupy the space like Mondrian. Next. And this was, by the way, that was for a study for stained glass windows as part of the WPA. Here is a painting on the left. It's called Gouache Number 5. At the 5th annual show of American Abstract Artists, she was invited to submit a painting in that show. And she walked around the show with Mondrian, didn't tell him that she had a work in it. They came to this painting as they walked around, and he said, "Whose is this?" And she says, "Well, it's mine." And he said, "Very strong inner rhythm, stay with it." And this whole comment of her inner rhythm stayed with her whole career, which echoed what Hoffman used to teach, that the highest quality in painting is always the rhythm. So she is flying. She's dancing, she's flying. She's got Mondrian. He's affected her substantially in the piece next to it, which she called a prophetic work. It was her first, it was a mosaic collage that she did for the work project for the WPA, influenced again by Mondrian and Matisse. That was first an assignment under the Federal Art Project for an artist named Harry Bowden, who was developing a mosaic, and she sort of took it over from him. Next. So, and these are, again, more of studies that she did, mural studies for the Federal Arts Project. She never got one of her studies actually executed as a mural. She did, however, as we'll see in 1959, had a major mural for a corporation on Broadway, which we'll see. But again, you see the artistry in this and also the very real influences of her favorites at the time, Mondrian and Matisse, and moving away from Picasso. Next. So 1941, I called it Search for the Real, and it's a real break. And it's a time that her whole career takes another shift, and it's really called Jackson Pollock. But first, she meets John Graham, who wrote a book called The System and Dialectics of Art. And he saw her work. He actually met her walking with another artist and looked down at her shoes, and they were covered with paint. And he said, "You're an artist, aren't you?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Could I see your work?" She takes him up to her studio. He likes the work and sends her a note. "Dear Lenore, arranging a show at the Macmillan Gallery." She started as Lena. She became Lenore, probably because she liked Edgar Allan Poe poem that had Lenore in it, and she ended up as Lee. But he said, "Dear Lenore, I'm arranging a show at the Macmillan Gallery with French and American painters. I want your large painting in the show." She knows everybody of the American artists except this one guy, Jackson Pollock. Never heard of him. She asked Graham, and he said, "Oh, he's terrific. You're going to like his work." She asks him right there for his address, and she goes around the block, goes up to his studio, knocks on the door, and is admitted by Jackson Pollock. Well, they are apparently smitten instantly. And when the show is on that her work appears in, and this is the work that she submitted, she's on Jackson Pollock's arm and they stride in as a couple. Her work is called Abstraction, and it's hung between Matisse and Braque, January 20th, 1942. How cool is that? Next. On the left and the right are two pieces that are indicative of Graham's sort of teaching as rigid and focused on color as the principal means of communicating emotion that she was learning with Hoffman. Graham it's all about drawing. The recording and the physical gesture, as he said, was the principal means of expression. And she was to really grab onto this with the greater emphasis that became more and more prominent in her career on the physicality of gesture and the use of line for increasing the trajectory of her work. And these are two examples. Next. But in 1942 through 45, she's now living with Pollock in New York, and she's floundering a little bit because she's so absorbed in him and his work, and she's trying to promote it, and she thinks he's a genius, and she's stuck with her own work, everything she's painting, including these two, which I think are really cool, and they're a little bit more figurative qua Graham, but everything she's painting feels like gray slabs, and she ends up destroying virtually everything. Next. Three things that she keeps. These two and the one on the next page are two that she kept and start to get more interesting for her. The one on the left, named Igor, this is a painting. She did a metaphorical painting of a rooster about her ex-boyfriend. And basically, she said, like a rooster who attacked other roosters with designs on its hens. That's the way she saw Igor. And so Igor was done, Pollock was in. The next painting, Image Surfacing, is really a break, and it starts to get very figurative. It is combining both the geometry, but this expressive gesturing. Next. And the last piece she did in New York before moving with Pollock to the Springs is this piece, which is called Blue Painting, which again, all seems to combine various elements that she's been absorbing along the way. And this, as I said, is the last painting before they go to the Springs. Next. They are now at the Springs. That's what they called their house. It's in East Hampton, and it is well worth a visit if you get a chance, which Sharon and I did, but we're going to visit now with this short video conducted by the director of the house. Jerry, do you have sound?
This makes me wonder.
David, you're
Okay,
not, are you hearing it?
not now, but I started to.
Oh,
Why do two young artists active in the New York art scene, living in the center of the art world in the US, if not the world, why did they move here to this fairly secluded place?
It was actually Lee's idea to move out here, but she wanted to come out for the winter, would be a part-time thing. But he said no. When they went back in the fall, he changed his mind. And he told her that they should move out here full-time, buy a house and settle down. Of course, the question was, what were they going to do for money? They didn't have any money, but Jackson's patron, Peggy Guggenheim, did. So it became Lee's job to convince Peggy that this was a good idea and that she should put up the money.
What was the division of labor like between the two artists? You know, owning a house is a big responsibility, a lot different than a New York apartment.
Definitely. I mean, both of them, I think, were in for a bit of a rude awakening when they moved in. They didn't have any plumbing or central heating. You can see behind us is a little white building, the outhouse. And Jackson admitted that it was what he called a little tough on a city slicker. But he'd been in New York City since he was 18. And Lee, of course, was born in Brooklyn, lived in New York her whole life. So there was a kind of culture shock, if you like, but they were determined to make a go of it. And they did.
How do you think being out here affected Lee's work?
I think it was crucial for her to move out from the city because, according to her, she had really hit an impasse. Whatever it was about the environment or the change of scene just allowed her to see everything with fresh eyes. And she started doing these beautiful all over, what she later called her little image paintings that were a real breakthrough for her.
Where did they work?
Well, first they worked in the house because they had to rent it while Lee convinced Peggy that she should lend them the down payment. So they had studios inside, and he upstairs in an unheated bedroom, and she downstairs in the back parlor near a wood stove. This was Lee's studio from about 1946 until 1956 after Pollock died. Then in 57, she moved into the Barnes studio. They only went into each other's studios by invitation, according to Lee. They liked to work in private. And then if she was having a problem, if she was having an impasse, she would call him in and say, what do you think? And he would say, according to her, oh, that's nonsense, just keep working. 1953, was doing a series of drawings up in the studio in the bedroom, and she was just disgusted with them. They just weren't working out. So she tore them up, threw them on the floor, walked out of the room and slammed the door, and didn't go back in for a couple of days. Then when she went back, she looked at the mess on the floor and she suddenly thought, that's kind of interesting. So she started making collages out of the pieces of the drawings. And it led her off into a whole new direction. She just got a whole new body of work out of this very happy accident, or out of a negative, she turned it into a positive.
It's exciting to be in the space where Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner did so many of their great paintings over the years. Can you tell us a little bit about this space?
This barn studio was originally located outside on the property where you see the concrete pad. So it was directly behind the house. And Jackson had it moved over here in 1946 to be converted as a studio. That's when the big window was put in and this wood floor. After his death in 1956, Lee took over this space and she worked here for the next 27 years. She worked on the walls. So all the
Jerry, I
marks,
think you could
colors and
stop.
gestures that you see on the wall are from her.
Can you tell us a little bit about Lee Krasner's working method?
Okay.
She said she liked to work always within her body size. She was 5'5", not much taller than I am. So reaching up, she didn't want to stand on a ladder. She wanted it to be something that she could react to basically one-on-one with the canvas. So when you see photographs of her at work, the paint is splashed right up to the ceiling. This is where she did her largest and most famous works.
Okay. Thank you, Jerry. Next. So this marks the time that she starts doing her little images, which were called little images because she was doing them in the small bedroom, hence little images. They were typically 40 by 30 sized images, but she was still working to undo her cubist orientation. She does 31 of these. They all over abstractions, meaning that each area of the composition is given equal attention and significance. She's painting in a state of what she called controlled chaos. Interestingly, so was Jackson Pollock outside in the barn. And they were meticulously crafted, intimately scaled paintings. Next. So on the left, while she's doing these paintings, and Noon on the right is a beautiful example of one of these all over little image, deftly painted images within the painting. She also does this mosaic, two of these, two tables that are 48 inches in diameter, because Jackson Pollock walks in with these old wagon wheels and says, "Can you do something with this?" And she creates these tables out of pebbles, glass, keys, coins, and jewelry. But again, she is now focused on these tiny jewel-like paintings. Next. These are two more where she's creating these little dramas almost inside the geometry of these white painted outlines, like white squares, and on the untitled, and they're beautiful. And we had a chance to see the most famous of these next in the Philadelphia Museum. So there on the left is what's called a tondo, which is really a circular work of art, where she's done one of these little image mosaics on the tondo. On the right is this character that's standing with her most famous little image. Sharon and I found out that the Philadelphia Art Museum had composition, which is always celebrated as the best example of her little image paintings. And it's not on view. And we wrote an email to see if they would permit us to come see it. And amazingly enough, they did. We went this past Friday, and we're told that it was a miracle because this is the most requested painting of the whole museum's holdings all over the world composition. It's usually traveling. And only the night before, they brought it out for the trustees meeting when they're talking about setting up new modern galleries. So this is quite a celebrated piece. It was exciting to look at it closely. Next. And this is looking at it closely. So this is what it looks like up close on the left. And I've circled this close up, and it's this thickly textured ground with white outlines that basically she used sticks, palette knives, or straight from the tube. And these overlapping schemes of dripped white paint formed these little geometric compartments and these convoluted designs. And even though it seems to be impenetrable and unreadable, the composition celebrates painting, as the curator said to us, as a primal means of communication through an analogy to picture-based writing systems, even perhaps the Kabbalah, which of course she had some familiarity and talked about, but really extraordinary as you get closer and closer and you see these magnificent little paintings within these geometries. Next. So this is another break. There is Jackson and Lee in their home, 1950. They don't look too happy. I think that was a lot of the time they weren't too happy. Jackson Pollock was drinking, he was abusive, and the last several years of his life, he produced less and less, was drunk a good part of the time. This is that sculpture. We saw this in the house and it was very striking. We not sure where it came from, but this is maybe their mind frame in 1950. And for her, it's a year of decision. She's finished with the little images. She was ready for another break, and she decided to experiment with a series of these automatic drawings, these quasi-figurative long neck figures that she called personages. And here she's looking on kind of doubtfully. She was her own worst critic. And next, none of these really have been found, but she painted many of them, but they've probably all got ripped up. These are two paintings, blue and black and black and white, that are collages. And she took from these personages and used them in making these collages, which are both just outstanding, especially blue and black, which they say was the piece that separated the little images and this period from and the Betty Parsons show, which I'm going to talk about, and collages. And these are really the first two collages that she did. Next. Okay. I just got a time check. I'm trying to talk fast. So Jackson Pollock invites his gallerist, Betty Parsons, to come see Lee's work out in the Springs. And he is just as big a promoter of her work as she is of his. And a lot of people don't know that. They think that she just lived in his shadow. She was overshadowed, but she was overshadowed by all the men abstract expressionists. But he gets Betty Parsons to come out to look at her work, and she is seeing these personages. She's seeing these abstractions. She's seeing work like this Gothic frieze. And she says, yeah, I want to give you a show. So they plan to have a show in 9 months from then. Lee Krasner shows up with 14 paintings. None of them look like Gothic frieze. All of them look like Equilibrium, which is a very Mondrian type painting, sort of reverting back a little bit. Maybe it was a manifestation of her own confidence in what she would be showing, but she brings equilibrium next. And she brings these, and if you look, they're big. 82 by 57 is number 3, and 132 by 92 is this beautiful piece of these overlapping rectangles. These are the only ones, equilibrium and these two, that remain from the 14. I think the rest were destroyed. They weren't sold. Betty Parsons wasn't thrilled because she was expecting Gothic frieze and she was getting these Mondrian type paintings, which were beautiful and are highly valued today, but weren't what she was expecting. Next. So here's another break. It's 1953 now, and all of the work that she's done, for the most part, that she didn't like, she's ripped up, thrown on the floor or in stacks, rejected, and including some of Jackson Pollock's ripped up stuff. And she decides, there's something I can do with this. And she's excited about collage, and she's already had some experience back in 1951, as we saw. So this becomes, these years, 53 to 55, is her collage period. Next. And they're spectacular. Here are two of them, City Verticals and Birding Campbell's. And these abstractions are large, dynamic collages. They're using oil and paper, cloth, canvas, and they're like nature photographs magnified. One of the critics who just flipped over these, and I can't find his name now, but he said, quote, "The irregular shapes and simple colors of the former paintings slow the pictures up, making the spectators aware of a subtle disorder greater than what one would otherwise have thought possible." A beautiful statement. Next. Here's two others, Shattered Light on the one hand and Stretched Yellow. And just, again, examples of her incredible collage technique of taking all these shards and shreds and pieces and creating these magnificent compositions. Again, large. The Stretched Yellow is 83 by 59, very dramatic. Next. This is one of her most famous, called Milkweed. And on the right, you can see the painting called Number 12 that she painted over as Milkweed, which is something that she did quite frequently. And Milkweed, again, introduces this collage, in particular, the natural world, which is an interest of hers, which is an aesthetic that broadens the whole vocabulary of abstract expressionism. And it's based on sort of the milkweed plant and the monarch butterfly, which apparently deposits its eggs on the plant. Next. Time for another break. From 53 to 55 is collage. And now she embarks on the Earth Green series. And this is the most dramatic of all breaks, because this is the year that Jackson Pollock dies. In 1956, she leaves for Europe. She needs a break. Pollock is increasingly drunk. He's running around with another woman named Ruth Kligman. She is goes to Europe. First time that she's been separated from Pollock for 14 years. She leaves on the easel this thing called prophecy. I say thing because it's odd, it's scary. It's this three-legged hybridized standing figure that is more grotesque and disturbing than anything she's ever done, ironically. Leaves it on the easel. She goes to Europe on the Queen Elizabeth. She tours southern France, returns to Paris to stay with friends, and gets a phone call from Clement Greenberg. Pollock is dead. in a car crash. He was driving drunk. He was with his girlfriend then, who he was throwing it in Krasner's face, even though she wrote a beautiful letter to him from France about how she wished he was there. He is killed. And the third person in the car, a friend of Ruth Kligman's, was also killed. Next. So go back, Jerry, to the one before. She is sitting here in front of a painting called Cauldron. This is 2 months after Pollock has died, and she is now in the barn, and she's just looking at a whole different future for herself. She's angry, she's grief-stricken, she's extremely sad, and she's on her own. Next. The painting on the left, which is a little bit like Prophecy, it refers to one of Pollock's earlier canvases entitled Two. This is 3 and 2, and the third figure is inserted between the male and figure, probably referring to Ruth Kligman. On the right is Cauldron, which she was sitting in front of, and Cauldron again, obviously reflecting the mix of emotions that she's feeling, like a cauldron, 60 by 50, painted now in the barn, everything now in the barn. And she is about to blow up in terms of the size and force of her work. Next. This is The Seasons, 1957, the largest of all of her paintings. This is 17 feet long. And brilliant. It, I think, is, well, we don't have it here, but it's one of the major museums. And just this, she claimed that all of her work is autobiographical, and this is sort of her new style. She is free of restraint. The anger, the energy, all the qualities of that of her work now exhibiting in this uncensored, unrestrained way. She is sort of broken free, and this painting is a great example of it. Next. Here are 2 more in 58, and they're joyous. They're overflowing, crowded, bursting. Sun Woman number 1, Sun Woman number 2, and they're both big. They're, almost 12 and 11 feet long, and just bursting with energy. And yet, with all of the energy, as one critic noted, they are somehow disciplined by a precise sense of scale, which I think is really one of the most impressive aspects of this later work by Lee Krasner. Next. This is the mural that she did. This is for the Uris Brothers building, 2 Broadway. It's 86 feet by 12 by 15. And she did another mural, a beautiful piece. We couldn't find it to show on another entrance, smaller, but really a beautiful abstraction. Next. Okay, time for another break. It's 1959. She's been for 3 years in the barn, and she suffers in 1959 some real setbacks. Clement Greenberg doesn't want to do one of her shows. Her mother dies, and she's kind of depressed, and she has insomnia. She can't sleep, and instead of just not sleeping, she decides to go into the barn and paint some of her most forceful, largest pieces, but all, it's called the Umber series, all in this monochromatic umber, brown, gray style. Why? Because she doesn't want, if there's no natural daylight, then she is going to paint in these very monochromatic ways. She's not going to use color the way she does in natural light. This is one that she did that she gets very excited about. The eye is the first circle. This is based on an Emerson story called circles. The eye is the first circle, the horizon which it forms is the second, and throughout nature, this primary figure is repeated without end. This really inspired her and inspired this painting, which is 93 by 192 inches. And it was set a record back in 2019, which has been exceeded now, but for 11.6 million at Sotheby's. Next. This painting is called Cool White. And here again, it demonstrates how she could exploit, and it's also huge, 72 by 114, how she could exploit this limited color palette of somber umber tones and white to its maximum effect through her dynamic use of form and brushwork. And again, she's dragging and pushing the pigment to create this energetic, pulsing image. Next. Polar Stampede, another enormous 160 by 94. Again, part of this umber series with all this gestural work, with this limited color palette, but all still accounting for such a powerful expression. Next. Here she's painting another one of the series. This is a photo in black and white, but she's using a ladder for obvious reasons. She's only 5'4", and she's painting this monumental, The Gate, which is 92 by 144. All of these paintings that she's painting during this period of insomnia are massive and gestural and highly energized while she's going without sleep. Next. Okay, time for another break. She's now in the 60s. She comes out of this dark monochromatic period with a flourish that is characterized by gesture and color. We're in the 1960s now, and let's go to the first one. And that's her in the studio in the barn. So this first one is in 1961, one of her earliest, called What Beast Must I Adore? Recalling that in 1939, when she was at the depths of misery and broke, and she wrote the same lines of the poem, To whom shall I hire myself out? What beast must I adore? Now, ironically, this is a joyous painting. She's feeling really good, and but it comes to mind when she finishes it to name it, What Beast Must I Adore? Next. Oh, there's that guy again. Sharon took this picture. We're in the National Gallery. This is called Cobalt Night. And just briefly, we go to the National Gallery. We know there must be a Lee Krasner painting somewhere. We go gallery to gallery in the East Wing, nothing. And finally, we go down a hallway and we see a Joan Mitchell painting, which she was the second generation New York school. And we think, uh-oh, something might be coming. And sure enough, we turn the corner and bam, here is Cobalt Night, which is such a powerful work of art. And we were thrilled to find it. And it really made that whole trip worthwhile. We were going to be very sorry if we didn't see any Lee Krasner work in our National Gallery. Next. This is a painting called Combat, again, enormous, 161 by 70. It's in the National Gallery in Australia, and it's named Combat. Why is it named Combat? It's named Combat because her grandnephew came while she was finishing the painting, and he said, what is it called? And she said, I don't know. What do you think I should call it? And he goes, Combat. And that's what she named it. Next. But you can see with Combat and here Gaia, this brilliant use of color, her interest in nature, this joyous sensibility that indicates that she has worked through her pain and anger, and she's creating these large-scale, brilliantly colored canvases, all influenced by Matisse and the Fauvists and her use of color, but also featuring her interest and commitment to nature. Now, this Gaia refers to the myth of Mother Earth, and the myth itself is kind of disturbing if anybody wants to check it out. And it's somewhat hinted at by these biomorphic forms in bright magenta that are pulsing with energy. Well, the myth itself is interesting, and one might want to take a look, but the painting is magnificent and one of her most famous paintings. Next. We're now in 1969, and she takes another break, as she calls it. And after a decade of these very large paintings, she decides to concentrate on small works of art. These are all, basically 20 by 20 and thereabout. And she does these small gouaches that she paints on coarse-grained, highly absorbent textured paper. And she does dozens of them. These she titles Earth, Water, Seed, and Hieroglyph. And in these, she is challenging herself to execute these in a more spontaneous way, a more economic way, and embodying, she is thinking and admiring the Japanese artists. And so she's trying to emulate them in this work. And she does this for all of 1969. She works on these. And a few of them are available, but they're quite interesting seen up close, but they're very, very organic works. At the end of 1969, next, she does this work called Portrait in Green, which itself is very organic, coming out of this period. This is apparently the only painting that was ever photographed where the photographer Mark Paticki photographed Krasner while she was working. And the image itself captures her fluid, very highly gestural style. And he said about this and about this painting, he said that he watched her, she would be very focused, standing back from the work about 15 feet, and then she would rush forward, making these slashing strokes, which astonished him, would astonish anyone. Next. And this is Portrait in Green. This is the completed painting. Again, beautiful and, quite large. Next. See my time. Okay. This is another break where she's now decides to paint these hard-edged organics. They're called, whether that's an apt name or not clear, but they are magnificent. And this is what she's doing in the 70s. Next. And when she shows these paintings, and she first shows them 1972 in the Marlborough Gallery, it opens to rave reviews. And Hilton Kramer of the New York Times pronounces it, and he's the New York Times art critic at the time, pronounces it the finest exhibition of Krasner's work that he's ever seen. Something of the sweep and rhythm of her former expressionist style has been retained in the bolder, hard-edged forms that these new pieces demonstrate, which are lyrical celebrations of life. And man, it's hard to feel otherwise. They are extraordinary. And Meteor, well, all of them, but next. And these two, Paligenesis, which is 134 inches by 82, and next to and below it, go next, Jerry. Yeah, no, go to the next one. And Mysteries and Sundial. When she paints these, all three of these, she says that she's using a palette of red, white, and black. And she is being influenced and capturing through her idea the influence of the Northwest Coast art, especially the wood and totemic carvings by the Haidas, the Tlingits, and the Quaitiols, or however that's pronounced. And apparently in 1941, when MoMA had a major show of North American art, it knocked her out. And she has waited all these years to try her hand, and the result is magnificent of these large, gestural, beautifully colored paintings. Next. So the last years, we're now in the 80s, and she's still doing fantastic work. She's gone back, for the most part, to collage, and she's now working on tabletops, which is probably a nod to the ease that it permits. And as you can see here, next, she's creating these collages. Again, she's gone back to collage, which I think is really just a great love of hers. And she also has all of the old paintings that she shredded and ripped up. So she has a lot to work with. This is called Vernal Yellow, 1980, oil paper canvas collage. And the second one, Between Two Appearances. Next. And this in 1981, 12-Hour Crossing. It, to me, is among the most arresting. It almost goes back with the flesh tones to Prophecy, which was on her easel when Pollock died. It seems to be, again, almost ironic, symbolic, 12-Hour Crossing. She's coming to the end of her career, but it's a timeless example, once again, of her keen eye for color and form. It's magnificent. And it's actually the cover of the book by Barbara Rose, which was the curator for her retrospective in New York. Next. The last work she did, apparently, was called Morning Glory. She did it for an exhibition at Guildhall in East Hampton, and if you're ever there, it's a fantastic art venue. And this was an exhibition where they were marrying art and poetry. And Howard Moss asked if he could partner with her on a painting, and he selected a poem, How Blue is Blue. And that's what she put in the painting, How Blue is Blue. And this is probably her last painting. And this is not a collage. She painted this freehand in her studio just for this exhibition. So now, next, Jerry. Now, to conclude, we're going to hear from Lee Krasner in her own words. There she is at the end of her career. She was an intimidating force that really handed it out to everyone. But what an artist. And these are her words.
I think all painting is biographical. I think you can read any artist if you take the trouble to.
Oh, Jerry, we need okay.
What, David?
The sound wasn't coming through, at least for me. If you're hearing it, then fine.
I think all painting is biographical. I think you can read any artist if you take the trouble to.
Now,
Are others hearing it?
I don't know. Hey, Sharon, are you hearing this?
It's breaking up, Jerry. It's, I don't know.
Ah, what a tragedy.
It's-
But
it
try,
worked.
go a little bit more.
I'm not sure why, so it's fine on my end.
First approval comes in this form. This is so good, you would not know it was done by a woman. Yeah,
I once had that said to me,
Yeah.
isn't it, it's the most peculiar feeling.
yeah, I know. You put it beautifully. It's a most, you don't know quite what to do with the damn thing.
How does a painting incubate you?
Heavy, heavy. What do you mean?
Trying to get into your head when you're standing there in front of that wall.
You just take a deep breath and hope for the best and get into it. And sometimes, as I say, it comes through miraculously. Anything can send me off to when it's time to get started, and then when the momentum gets going, when the rapport starts, then I'm in a work stretch. I did a batch of drawings. I had them pinned up in the whole studio. I went in one day, I hated them, and I tore them all up and threw them on the floor. When I went into the studio again, which was several days later, they looked pretty good that way. This seems to be a work process of mine. I'm constantly going back to something I did earlier, remaking it, doing something else with it, and coming forth with another, more clarified image, possibly. I don't know. I can tell when the thing is alive and going, and that, gets me all my adrenaline going, and then I want to stay with it. I pretty much know by now. And when it's a dead duck, I know that too. Color for me is a very mysterious thing. I might say, I haven't done anything in blue, I'm going to use blue. But then it's like it comes out green or alizarin crimson or something. I'm aware of that. I'm conscious of that kind of thing, but I don't try to change it. I don't say it's got to be blue. And
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our visit with Lee Krasner, who I hope everybody agrees is a phenomenal artist, fully deserving of the acclaim she's only now getting, really. I don't know if there are any questions. I can't hear anything.
Great presentation, David. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Well done.
David, you had shown a number of paintings that you said disappeared or destroyed or ripped up. How did these images get saved when the original is gone?
Well, I mean, obviously, most of what I showed were paintings that weren't ripped up. The collages were so many of the paintings she ripped up, nobody's ever seen. They were ripped up, destroyed, thrown away. But a number of them she held on to, especially as she discovered this great opportunity for her to create new art out of what she otherwise would have thrown away. So she kept some, others she just threw away. But it's been noted that the body of her work over all those years is less than some other artists because she threw so much of it away.
David, we're so indebted to you for creating this body of work for us to, to begin to appreciate. We had no idea, and you've given us a gift. We thank you.
I appreciate it. Listen, it's a privilege for me. And I want to thank my partner Sharon for putting in like 39 hours, I think, of trying to put together the presentation. But it's a privilege because as painful as it is at times, what a marvelous opportunity to get to know an artist that I didn't know really anything about, and certainly didn't have the respect and appreciation for her work that I do now. And discovering it in the museums, and especially in Philadelphia Museum of Art, where, the curator said to us, this is the most valuable piece of art we have of American modernism and most requested of all of our artwork by other museums. They can't hold it on to it in their in the museum. So that we got to see it was a miracle. Hey guys.
Anyone else? Ronnie, were you raising your hand? You're muted. You're muted.
She can't hear it.
Yeah, you could unmute everybody, Jerry. Even some of them.
Hello, David. This is Greg Gelb.
Hey, how are you?
All right, David. I'm driving, so excuse the picture, but you did a great job, and I loved her. I loved her art. I've never really known it was hers before, but of course, my mother, was an artist. She brought us up in Rockland with you and Rob,
Right.
and she had the same paid boy haircut.
And Greg,
it's just
Greg,
interesting
are you still playing jazz with your band?
Oh yeah, that's where I'm going right now, David. On the way to teach my youth ensemble.
Oh, fantastic. Great to hear from you.
But I've got all these pieces of art in my room. I've got a George Gross. I've kept all my mother's artwork because she used to go, she went to the Art Students League and she was good friends with Helen Keane. And so I just wish we had known more about Lee. It's just interesting to draw the parallels between Lee and my mother. My mother, she chose the more or less suburban life, and I think it probably frustrated her immensely. And so it's just interesting. I want to learn more about Lee. So thanks so much for doing this. You did a great job.
Thanks. Great to hear from you, Greg.
Okay, David. Thank you.
All right, see you.
David, it's curious that such a powerful, strong, opinionated woman would stay with Pollock that long when he became abusive and an alcoholic.
It is a great question. Well, first of all, I guess love has its own strange ways. Secondly, she so admired his work. It was really hard to separate him from the work, and she promoted him. She was dedicated to it. But, I think, I don't know. Why do people stay in abusive marriages and relationships?
Yeah.
It's just another example. But he was the most famous artist in America at the time.
Wow.
And yet I believe that she was his equal or surpassed him.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is wonderful. Thank you for this presentation, because I really gained a much more in-depth knowledge of her work and where it fit into the history of art.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, she knew and was in the middle of all of them. Rothko and Newman and de Kooning and Klein and, all of them. And she was their equal in that milieu. But she just didn't get reviewed the way they did. So, yeah. No, great discovery.
It seemed like she had as many periods as Picasso. I mean,
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
Yeah, she called them breaks. And she said, this was just part of her mojo. She periodically would turn to something else.
It was astounding to see the proficiency, her artistry on so many, in so many turns of, every direction. She is magnificent. Really, I so appreciate what you did here, David. Thank you.
Right. I mean, to see the arc of her career, I personally think it's attributable to her training. She was so dedicated as a student and trained and learned from all of these experts and just developed her tools to a point that she could do almost whatever she wanted with color and line and space. So, yeah.
David, I had not heard anything about this woman before. And it's fascinating to me that she was able to pivot. And I know you said that she called them breaks, but it was really, it seemed to me kind of an evolution, a kind of a pivot from one thing to another and be so successful at it too,
Yeah.
to just keep evolving.
Right. And the scale that she painted with, especially after she moved in the barn, I mean, she's making dozens of pieces that are more than, 9, 10 feet long, huge. And yet she manages to keep the scale appropriate, even with these gigantic sizes.
Yes, and I was thinking about how she said she didn't want to get up on a ladder, and that changed.
Right.
Everything changed. She was just willing to allow everything to change as she went along, which was, kind of amazing.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you so much for this.
Oh, pleasure. Okay. Well, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.
Yeah, I
Thank
want to
you.
mention that this is recorded. So for anybody who missed this will be on the Kehilat Hanahar website, and they won't be missing it. This is a gem. Thank you so much, David.
The best, David.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
David,
Hi, Danielle.
thank you very much. It was really enlightening. I didn't even know her existence, and I'm amazed by the richness of her work.
Yeah. You and me both. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Danielle.
You did a great job.
Thank you. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you.